Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a guide for the first-time cuckolding experience. But we're not just talking about the physical side of things. No, this is all about the psychological journey, from the build-up to what happens after. So, are you curious about your first time? Look, if you are definitely not alone. But here's what this guide really hammers home. For a lot of people, the most intense part of this whole thing, it happens right up here, in your head, way before anything physical even begins. Yeah, it's way more about psychology than you might think, so let's get into it. The guide we're breaking down today, it treats this whole experience less like a physical script and more like, well, like a detailed roadmap for your heart and your mind. All right, so we're going to tackle this in 4 main parts, just like the guide lays it out. We'll start with the anticipation and mental prep, move into the experience itself, then talk about the aftermath, and wrap it all up with the big lessons learned. Okay, let's kick things off with part 1, the anticipation. Now, the guide puts a huge amount of focus right here, and for good reason. It argues that the time leading up to the main event, it can actually feel even more intense than the experience itself. Crazy, right? And this leads to something the guide calls an obsessive thought loop. You know, where your mind just cycles through all the what-ifs over and over. But here's the really cool insight. This isn't a red flag. It's not a sign you should bail. It's actually your brain's way of getting ready for a major emotional event. It means you're taking it seriously. And that thought loop brings a whole mix of feelings with it. You're looking at intense arousal 1 minute, then anxiety the next, then excitement, then doubt. The guide says it's totally normal to feel all of these things, sometimes all within a single hour. That emotional roller coaster isn't a bad sign. It's just your mind and body getting ready for what's to come. So, with all that intensity, how do you actually manage the waiting period? Well, the guide gives some super practical advice. First, stay grounded. Keep up with your normal routines like work and exercise. Be really intentional about your intimacy as a couple. And you have to get those thoughts out of your head. Write them down in a journal, or even better, ramp up the communication with your partner. All right, moving on to part 2, the experience itself. Now we're shifting gears from all that mental prep to what it's like to navigate the emotions in real time. This is one of the biggest points in the whole guide, the massive difference between your imagination and what actually happens. Think about it. Your fantasy is like a perfectly edited movie, right? But reality, it's live, it's unscripted, it's full of unexpected details, sounds, maybe even some awkwardness. The #1 piece of advice here, try to let go of that perfect movie in your head and just be present for the real thing. And speaking of reality hitting you, the guide talks about a really common reaction for the cuckold, the freeze response. The first moments can feel, well, surreal, almost like you're watching it happen from outside your own body. It's not a sign that something's wrong. It's literally just your nervous system on overload, trying to process an incredibly intense new reality. Okay, let's talk about the big C word, compersion. You know, that feeling of joy you get from seeing your partner experience joy and pleasure with someone else. For many, it's the holy grail, but the guide gives a super important reality check, especially for your first time. And here it is. It might not happen your first time, and that is absolutely okay. I mean, this is so important. The guide really stresses this. If you don't feel it right away, it doesn't mean you failed or you're doing it wrong. It's an emotion that can take time to develop, and trying to force it will probably just backfire. So what if a difficult moment hits? Because let's be real, the guide is very clear that it probably will. Almost every first-timer has a challenging moment, a flash of jealousy, a sudden wave of anxiety, and how you prepare for that moment can make all the difference. This is exactly why having a pre-agreed strategy is so crucial. You need a game plan. The guide is crystal clear on this. Just trying to push through a tough feeling, it almost never works. Using your safe word, taking a pause, reconnecting, that's not failure, that's wisdom. It's a sign that you're taking care of each other. Which brings us to part 3, the aftermath, because the experience doesn't just end when the third person walks out the door. According to this guide, what happens next is every bit as important as the event itself. Seriously, your brain and your body need time to catch up and process everything that just happened. You've got the immediate aftermath where hormones are all over the place. Then you have the first few hours after, which are so key for reconnecting and maybe reclaiming that intimacy. And it doesn't stop there. For days afterward, new thoughts and feelings are going to keep surfacing. And the feelings you might experience in that aftermath are, well, they're all over the map. You could feel total euphoria, this incredible closeness with your partner, or you might feel confused or just completely exhausted physically and emotionally. There's also something called a drop, a kind of sadness. The main thing the guide wants you to know is that all of it, every single one of these feelings, is normal and valid. Okay, so after going through all that, what are the big lessons here? Let's get to part 4 and really zero in on the key takeaways. We're talking about the most common mistakes to avoid and a final checklist to see if you're really ready. Look, learning from other people's mistakes is always a good idea, right? The guide points to a few common pitfalls. The absolute biggest ones are not doing enough prep and boundary talks beforehand and having no plan for aftercare. Others include getting caught up in unrealistic expectations, that whole porn aesthetic, and, really importantly, ignoring your gut instincts. So, are you ready? The guide boils it all down to this final checklist. And look, the point of this isn't to guarantee a perfect outcome. That's impossible. The point is to create the safest possible container for a very unknown experience. If you can honestly say yes to these key questions about communication, emotional readiness, practical prep, and aftercare, you've done the work. I love this quote from the guide. The destination matters less than the journey, and the journey begins with a decision to try. Ultimately, that's the whole vibe here. This isn't a performance you have to get right. It's a learning experience. It's about what you find out about yourself, about your partner, and about your relationship through the whole process. Which really brings us back to the beginning, to the most important question of all. The journey begins with a decision to try. But before you can even make that decision, are you ready for the conversation? Because that's what this guide makes so incredibly clear. The whole thing doesn't start with the act. It starts with the talk, with that open, honest, and maybe kind of scary conversation between two people who are deciding to explore this together.